It was a secret no one in the small town of Meadowridge could have imagined, let alone spoken aloud. Siblings Eli and Samantha Rowe had always been close, too close, some might say. But what began as an unusually intense bond in childhood spiraled into something far darker, hidden behind the facade of a loving family. By the time the truth came to light, one of them would be dead, and the other behind bars for life. From the outside, the Rowe family looked unremarkable. Just another quiet household in the sleepy town of Meadowridge, nestled between wide fields and forgotten roads. Their modest home, with its fading blue shutters and overgrown lawn, hardly stood out. But behind closed doors, something unsettling was growing, something no one dared to imagine. Eli and Samantha Rowe were only 2 years apart, born to James and Carla Rowe, a couple often described as distant but well-meaning. James, a retired Navy officer, was often absent due to deployments during the children's early years. Carla, emotionally fragile and battling chronic depression, spent much of her time either sedated or locked away in her bedroom. With little adult supervision, the Rowe children learned to rely on each other, and only each other. From the time they were young, Eli and Samantha were inseparable. At school, they sat together at lunch, walked home side by side, and preferred each other's company over anyone else's. Neighbors found it sweet at first, two siblings who had found solace in each other amid a fractured home. Teachers praised their closeness, mistaking it for emotional maturity. But as the years went on, what once seemed endearing began to feel off. By the time Samantha turned 15 and Eli was 13, they no longer behaved like typical siblings. They shared a bedroom for longer than most kids their age, despite there being space for separate rooms. They had their own language, coded phrases, whispered jokes, and secret glances that only they understood. When they weren't together, they were texting non-stop. When one was upset, the other would drop everything. There was a kind of urgency to their bond, a possessiveness that grew with each passing year. Friends noticed, classmates whispered. One parent who hosted Samantha for a sleepover later told others she felt uneasy with how often Samantha mentioned her brother, even comparing him to her other half. When Samantha turned 18, she announced she was moving out to attend the local community college. No one was surprised. What did raise eyebrows, however, was her insistence on bringing Eli, then only 16, with her. She claimed their home life was unstable, and that it would be healthier for Eli to stay with her. Carla was too medicated to argue, and James, now living in another state after a separation, sent some money and gave his reluctant blessing. The two moved into a modest one-bedroom apartment on the edge of campus. Samantha signed the lease. Eli dropped out of high school and enrolled in online classes. Neighbors assumed they were a young couple starting out. When they found out the two were siblings, confusion often followed by concern. They shared the bed. They shopped for groceries together. They fought like a couple and made up like one too. On more than one occasion, neighbors reported hearing shouting late at night, only to see them the next morning holding hands at the local diner. One elderly tenant recalled seeing Samantha sit in Eli's lap while they watched the 4th of July fireworks from the apartment balcony. Still, no one said anything. No one wanted to believe what their instincts told them. That changed when a new roommate, Kelsey, moved into the apartment briefly to help cover rent. Within a few weeks, she began noticing strange behavior. Eli and Samantha never locked the door to their shared bedroom. They showered with the door open. Once, Kelsey came home early to find them cuddled under a blanket on the couch, watching an old home video, whispering softly, Eli stroking Samantha's hair. Kelsey later told police that the moment that confirmed her suspicions was overhearing a late-night argument. She had gone to the kitchen for water and heard Samantha screaming, "Why do you keep looking at her that way? I'm the one who loves you. You're mine, Eli." When Kelsey confronted them the next day, Samantha lashed out, accusing her of being paranoid and invasive. Eli remained silent, avoiding eye contact. Kelsey packed her things and moved out a week later, but not before reporting the incident to the campus counselor. That report set off a chain reaction. Child Protective Services was called. A caseworker visited their apartment unannounced. Both Eli and Samantha denied any inappropriate relationship. They insisted their closeness was a product of growing up in a dysfunctional household. They told the caseworker they'd always leaned on each other. Nothing more. There was no physical evidence, no admissions, just suspicion. Without legal grounds, CPS closed the case, but the visit had consequences. The scrutiny pushed Eli and Samantha even deeper into secrecy and paranoia. Samantha withdrew from her classes. Eli stopped communicating with old friends. Their social media accounts went dark. They rarely left the apartment except for groceries. It was as though they had created their own world, isolated from judgment, protected by their lies. Yet beneath the surface, something was shifting. Cracks were beginning to form in their perfect bubble. Eli had started messaging a classmate from his online program, a girl named Natalie. They shared music, exchanged jokes, and eventually met in person for coffee. And Samantha noticed. She noticed everything, and she wasn't about to let go. Not now. Not ever. Samantha always knew when Eli was hiding something. It was part of their twisted dynamic. She read him like a diary, and he, consciously or not, let her. When Eli started spending time away from the apartment, his explanations were vague. Study groups, library work, late-night jogs. Samantha smiled on the surface, but inside, suspicion churned. Then she found it. His phone, left charging while he showered. It buzzed with a new message from Natalie. A heart emoji. Samantha's fingers trembled as she scrolled through their conversations. Natalie was bubbly, kind, and clearly infatuated with Eli. And worse, Eli liked her back. He wasn't just being polite. His messages were affectionate, his tone warm. Samantha felt the ground shift beneath her. To her, it wasn't jealousy. It was betrayal. That night, Samantha didn't confront Eli. She waited, observed. She began reading his messages regularly, even installing spyware on his laptop to monitor his online activity. To Eli, the walls of the apartment were closing in. He couldn't name it yet, but he felt it. Samantha watching him more closely, her touch lingering longer, her questions more invasive. When he told her he was thinking of applying to a 4-year university in another city, the change in her was immediate. The mask slipped. She laughed at first, then the questions came. Why would you leave? Are you bored of me? You don't actually think she loves you, do you? Eli tried to reassure her, but the tone had changed. It wasn't worry. It was ownership. He started sleeping with his bedroom door locked. When Samantha caught him talking to Natalie on the phone late one night, she didn't say a word. She waited until the next day to create a burner social media account and began sending Natalie anonymous threats. Stay away from him, he's not yours. You don't know what you're getting into. He's taken forever. Natalie was shaken. She showed Eli the messages, and at first he brushed it off as a random troll. But deep down, he knew. He didn't want to believe it, but he knew. As the days went on, Samantha's behavior grew erratic. She'd burst into tears without warning, then laugh as if nothing had happened. She began cooking Eli elaborate dinners, sitting too close, whispering late at night about how they didn't need anyone else, that they were meant to be together, that no one could understand them. When Eli tried to pull away, she became more desperate. One night she stood in the doorway of his room, silhouetted by the hallway light, and said quietly, "If you leave me, Eli, I won't survive. You'll kill me, or I'll kill you. That's what soulmates do, right? We live and die together." Eli didn't sleep that night. He knew it then, with terrible clarity. What they had wasn't a bond. It was a prison. And he needed to escape before it consumed them both. Eli's world was shrinking. What once felt like a sanctuary with his sister had turned into a suffocating windowless cage. Every movement he made was tracked, every message scrutinized, every friendship questioned. And at the center of it all stood Samantha, no longer just a protective sister, but a watchful captor, driven by a love that had long twisted into something else. After the threats to Natalie, Eli tried to distance himself. He blocked the anonymous account, reassured Natalie that things were okay, and avoided talking about Samantha altogether. But the damage was done. Natalie had seen something in his eyes, a fear he couldn't hide. She quietly began to back away, not wanting to get caught in whatever was unraveling. Samantha sensed the shift and grew bolder. She stopped pretending. She no longer masked her obsession with concern or disguised her control as care. When Eli attempted to leave the apartment without explanation, she stood in the doorway, blocking him, arms folded, asking where he was going, with whom, and why he hadn't told her. It was no longer subtle. It was interrogation. Eli, emotionally drained, began lying just to buy himself breathing room. He'd say he was going to the store but sit in the park for hours, scrolling through college applications on his phone and wondering how far he'd have to run to truly be free. Then, the incident at the grocery store. They were shopping late one night and Eli saw Natalie with a friend. Their eyes met briefly. She gave him a cautious smile, then quickly turned away. Samantha noticed. She didn't say anything until they got home. Then she exploded. "You still talk to her, don't you?" she screamed, slamming the groceries onto the counter. "You think she's better than me? You think she knows you like I do?" Eli tried to calm her, telling her he hadn't even spoken to Natalie, but Samantha wasn't listening. She stormed into her room and emerged minutes later with a box of keepsakes, photos, drawings, small gifts they'd exchanged over the years. She threw them onto the floor between them. "You promised me," she whispered, her voice trembling. "You said you'd always stay with me." Eli stood frozen. The promise, made years ago when he was a child, now felt like a noose tightening around his neck. That night, he started sleeping with a kitchen knife under his pillow. Because love, Eli realized, wasn't supposed to feel like fear. And whatever existed between them now, it was no longer love at all. It happened on a cold Sunday evening in late October, the kind of night when the streets of Meadowridge were quiet and the autumn chill crept into every corner of the air. Eli had been preparing for this moment for weeks. He'd kept it all inside, the panic, the confusion, the guilt. He'd cried alone in the park, written goodbye letters he never sent, and mapped out routes to colleges far from the small town where his nightmare had taken root. Now, he was finally ready to leave Samantha, for good. He waited until their mother left town for a weekend church retreat, knowing there would be no interruptions. That night, he made a simple dinner and waited for Samantha to come home from her evening walk, something she had recently taken up to clear her head. The moment she walked in, he asked her to sit. He was calm, measured, honest. "I need to leave," Eli said, avoiding her eyes. "I want something normal, Sam. I want a life that isn't built on secrets." At first, Samantha was silent. She stared at him, her mouth slightly open, blinking as though she hadn't fully processed what he was saying. Then came the shaking of her head. "Number no? You don't mean that?" Eli nodded slowly. "I do. I've already applied to 2 colleges. I'm going to move into a dorm in January." Samantha stood abruptly, knocking over her chair. Her breathing quickened. "You're abandoning me. After everything we've been through. After everything we are to each other." Eli stood too, stepping back instinctively. "We're brother and sister," he said, his voice cracking. "What we've been doing, it's wrong. I can't do it anymore. I won't." The room fell into an icy silence. Samantha's face was pale now, lips trembling. And then, with a voice so calm it was terrifying, she said, "If you walk out that door, Eli, I swear to God, I'll make sure you never walk back through it." The threat hung in the air like a blade, but Eli didn't respond. He turned, walked to his room, and quietly closed the door. He didn't sleep that night. Every sound, every creak of the floor, every gust of wind against the window made his pulse quicken. He kept his phone in one hand, the kitchen knife under his pillow in the other. The next morning, he left the apartment early, hoping to stay out until she calmed down. But when he returned just after noon, everything changed. He opened the door to find Samantha sitting on the couch, her eyes red and swollen, a kitchen knife beside her on the cushion. She looked up at him and smiled weakly. "I thought if I showed you how much I was hurting, maybe you'd understand," she said softly. Eli backed toward the door, realizing too late that she wasn't trying to win him back anymore. She was warning him that she'd already made up her mind and he was running out of time. The call came in at 7:42 a.m. on a Tuesday morning. Samantha's voice was frantic, sobbing so hard the dispatcher could barely make out the words. "My brother," she cried. He attacked me. I had to. I didn't mean to. I stabbed him. He's not moving. Please, send someone. Please." When first responders arrived at the Rowe apartment, Samantha was slumped on the living room floor, her shirt smeared with blood, and her hands shaking violently. Eli lay a few feet away in a pool of his own blood, face down, his body still. There was no pulse. He had been dead for hours. The scene was chaotic. The coffee table was overturned. A shattered lamp lay nearby. A kitchen knife, still wet, rested next to Eli's body. To the untrained eye, it looked like a violent struggle. But as investigators from the Meadowridge Police Department examined the scene more closely, the details started to raise questions. Serious ones. The first red flag was the body itself. Eli had been stabbed 12 times, with most of the wounds concentrated in his back and sides. There were no defensive wounds on Samantha, no bruises, no cuts, not even a scratch. Her claim of self-defense didn't align with the physical evidence. Detective Rachel Medina, a seasoned investigator with a sharp eye for inconsistencies, was assigned to the case. It took her less than 10 minutes to sense that something was off. Samantha's story kept shifting. First, she said Eli tried to strangle her. Then she said he'd grabbed the knife. Later, she claimed she blacked out and didn't remember anything. "We've seen a lot of domestic cases," Medina later told reporters. "But this one, it didn't feel spontaneous. It felt personal, controlled, calculated." As officers secured the crime scene, they uncovered a small box beneath Samantha's bed. Inside were photographs of her and Eli, some innocent, others disturbingly intimate. A notebook filled with handwritten entries painted a darker picture. One entry read, "If he loves her more than me, I'll make sure she never gets to have him." Another, "We were meant to be. We were born to belong to each other. If he leaves me, I'll follow him into the next life." The discovery changed the tone of the investigation instantly. An autopsy confirmed what the detectives had feared. Eli had been stabbed from behind. He hadn't even seen the first blow coming. There were no traces of alcohol or drugs in his system. The wounds were deep and deliberate, indicating a sustained attack, one carried out with emotion, not panic. Detectives brought Samantha in for further questioning that same evening. She wore a loose hoodie and sweatpants, her hair tied back, dark circles under her eyes. She clung to the original story, insisting it had been self-defense. "He snapped," she said. "He was jealous. I tried to calm him down." But Detective Medina leaned in and slid the notebook across the table. "Tell me about this," she said, tapping the ink-stained pages. "Tell me why you wrote that. If you couldn't have him, no one could." Samantha froze. Her face crumbled, but still she denied everything. "That was just writing. That's not what happened." The next morning, police executed a full search warrant on the apartment. In addition to the journal, they found Samantha's computer, which contained deleted chat logs, searches about fatal stab wounds, and dozens of unsent emails to Eli, all written in the weeks before his death. Each message dripped with obsession. "You are mine. I don't care what the world says. We can run, or we can die together." The case against her was growing stronger by the hour. To the outside world, Samantha Rowe was a grieving sister, but to law enforcement, she was quickly becoming the prime suspect in one of the most disturbing homicides the town had ever seen. And the investigation had only just begun. The trial of Samantha Rowe would become one of the most talked about criminal cases in Meadowridge history. For months, the small town buzzed with speculation, disgust, and disbelief. What had begun as whispered rumors about the closeness between a brother and sister had now erupted into full-blown public horror, a murder trial tinged with taboo, obsession, and betrayal. The courtroom was packed on the first day of proceedings. Local reporters lined the benches. Curious residents, many of whom had known the Rowe siblings since they were children, showed up daily. Some came seeking justice. Others simply couldn't look away. Samantha, now 19, entered court in a beige prison jumpsuit, her hair pulled back, her face pale and emotionless. To the public, she looked more like a frightened teenager than a cold-blooded killer. But the prosecution saw something else entirely, a young woman driven to madness by her desire to possess her brother at any cost. The prosecution's case was meticulously detailed. They opened with a timeline of the siblings' disturbing relationship, the cohabitation, the isolation, the obsessive messages. They brought forward Natalie, Eli's classmate and brief romantic interest, who testified about the anonymous threats she received, later traced back to Samantha's IP address. Then came the expert witnesses. A forensic psychologist described Samantha's behavior as indicative of coercive control and obsessive fixation, noting that her writings and actions were not signs of a harmless crush, but of deep-rooted delusion. The most damning evidence came when the prosecution read aloud entries from Samantha's private journal. "He belongs to me. This world won't let us be together, so I'll have to take him away from it." Photos found in the apartment, the chilling internet searches about stab wounds and quick, silent methods of killing, and the lack of defensive injuries, all painted a grim picture. The prosecution argued that Samantha had planned Eli's murder well in advance, waiting for a moment when he was alone, vulnerable, and cornered. The defense, meanwhile, had few options. They acknowledged the closeness between Samantha and Eli, but argued that the murder was not premeditated. Instead, they claimed Samantha suffered from undiagnosed mental illness, specifically a dissociative disorder stemming from childhood trauma. They maintained she had acted in a dissociative fugue state, an emotional breakdown brought on by years of confusion, abandonment, and secrecy. But the jury was unmoved. As the trial wore on, Samantha's emotional state began to crumble. At first, she maintained her innocence with a cold detachment. But on the third day of cross-examination, something changed. After being confronted once again with the graphic journal entries, Samantha broke down. "I didn't mean to kill him," she sobbed. "I just wanted him to stay." The courtroom fell silent. Everyone, jury, reporters, even the judge, froze. The prosecution paused, letting the moment sink in. Samantha continued, her voice trembling. "I thought if he left me, I wouldn't exist anymore. He was my life. He was everything I had." When asked directly if she had killed Eli Rowe, Samantha finally whispered, "Yes." With that admission, the course of the trial shifted. The defense arranged a plea deal with the prosecution. Samantha would plead guilty to second-degree murder in exchange for a reduced sentence, sparing the town a drawn-out trial and sparing the Rowe family further pain. At sentencing, the judge spoke somberly. "This is one of the most tragic cases I've seen in my career. It is not only a story of death, but of manipulation, obsession, and mental unraveling. A young man with his whole life ahead of him is gone, and a young woman's life too is all but destroyed." Samantha Rowe was sentenced to 35 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 28. For the town of Meadowridge, the trial left behind more questions than answers. How could this have gone unnoticed for so long? How could two siblings fall so far? And could anyone have stopped it? The verdict may have been delivered, but the shockwaves from Eli Rowe's murder continued to ripple through the town of Meadowridge long after the courtroom doors had closed. In a community where most people had known each other for decades, the truth of what happened behind the closed doors of the Rowe home felt like a betrayal of trust, a violation of the town's sense of normalcy. The idea that something so dark, so unimaginable, had festered right beneath their noses filled many residents with guilt, confusion, and unease. Eli's funeral was held quietly at a local chapel. No media, no cameras. Just a few close friends, a few extended relatives, and a eulogy delivered by Pastor Wren, who had baptized both Rowe children years ago. "He was kind," the pastor said, his voice trembling. Kind in a way that made people feel safe. And somehow, he didn't feel safe himself. Eli's mother, Carla, sat in the front pew, staring ahead blankly, her hands clutched around a crumpled tissue. She had barely spoken since the arrest. Some said she hadn't accepted the truth. Others believed she had seen it coming all along and simply chose not to face it. After the trial, Carla sold the Rowe house and moved out of town. She left no forwarding address. Samantha's name was wiped from school plaques, community rosters, and even digital records. Teachers who once praised her now avoided her memory. The apartment she once shared with Eli sat vacant for months, its windows boarded up, a grim reminder of what had happened there. No one wanted to live in a place so tainted by tragedy. The case also stirred painful public conversations about mental illness, taboo relationships, and the responsibilities of community intervention. Some residents argued that Child Protective Services had failed Eli. Others blamed the schools for not doing more when signs of an unhealthy sibling dynamic were reported. Everyone had a theory, but no one had answers. Natalie, the classmate Eli had tried to build a new life with, moved out of Meadowridge shortly after the trial. She never spoke publicly about her involvement, though those who knew her said she carried a deep sense of survivor's guilt. As for Samantha, she was transferred to a correctional facility specializing in inmates with psychiatric needs. There, she began therapy. According to officials, she remained quiet and cooperative, but deeply withdrawn. In her intake interview, she was asked why she did it, why she killed the one person she claimed to love most. She reportedly replied, "Because I couldn't imagine a life where he didn't love me back." For many, that answer haunted me more than anything else. Over the months that followed, true crime forums and amateur podcasts picked up the story. It became the subject of online speculation and media coverage. Some dubbed it the Rowe tragedy. Others referred to Samantha as the sister who loved too much. The narrative was sensationalized, dissected, and debated. But in Meadowridge, there was no need for dramatization. The pain was real. The scars are permanent. Behind the sensational headlines was the grim truth of two young lives twisted by trauma, secrecy, and emotional dependency. A brother who tried to break free. A sister who couldn't let go. A family was destroyed. A community forever altered. And in the end, the question that still lingered in everyone's mind was the simplest and most devastating of all. What if someone had said something sooner? In the end, this wasn't just a story about murder. It was a story about silence, about secrets, about what happens when the boundaries we trust to protect us, between family and intimacy, love and control, begin to blur and then disappear entirely. Eli Rowe was a young man searching for freedom, for identity, for something normal. But what he found instead was a trap laid by someone he thought he could trust most. Samantha Rowe wasn't a monster in the traditional sense. She was a product of trauma, neglect, of emotional distortion. But none of that could undo what she did. One life was lost, another was ruined. And a community was left asking itself the question it never imagined it would have to face. What is love when it turns to possession? What is family when the lines get crossed? Today, Samantha serves a decades-long sentence in a state facility. Eli lies in a quiet cemetery plot in Meadowridge, remembered by few but mourned by many who wish they had done more. We tell these stories not to sensationalize them, but to learn from them, to listen closer, to speak up, to understand that even the darkest crimes often begin in silence, because love should never cost a life, and some lines should never, ever be crossed. If this story touched you, like, share, and subscribe to my channel for more videos. Thank you for watching.